not involved in any way. As a matter of fact, he was standing on the first floor watching the parade.
Using unprecedented modern-day digital computer technology, Larry Rivera presents scientific evidence which in any court of law would exonerate Lee Oswald of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Rivera meticulously takes the reader through the intricacies of digital overlays which prove that Lee was standing in the book depository doorway while the assassination was taking place, that the backyard photos were cleverly manufactured to frame him, and how the 3D program Blender can recreate Dealey Plaza was on 22 November 1963, so we can finally determine where JFK was really shot that fateful day. As if this were not enough, Rivera reveals what really happened on Elm Street as recently transcribed interviews with the motorcycle escort officers who were closest to JFK that day describe a heretofore unknown version of the events that shook our nation to its core and affected the history of the world forever. Don't miss it.
Hi, this is Gary King. If you're interested in the book, then go to patriotradiobooks.com. That's patriotradiobooks.com.
Hi, this is Gary King. Quick heads up. All 200 shows deleted by YouTube will soon be available at patriotradiobooks.com. Go there and sign up with our email list, and we'll contact you as soon as it's available. Enjoy the JFK show. Welcome to the new JFK show number 237. We call it new because we do new research, but we found a picture of one of the original researchers. And fellas, you know, it was a long time ago we had the JFK hotties. You have to admit, there's not many hotties in JFK, and we won't even bring up Lady Bird, but we've got Marilyn Monroe, Jackie Kennedy, we've got the lady we talked to.
No, just kidding.
Beverly Oliver.
Beverly Oliver, and we've got a new one. Now, you talk about new research, we've got a new hottie in JFK. So, Larry, we're going to turn it over to you and show the first picture that we've ever seen.
Well, I have to thank my good friends, you know, David Knight, Brian Edwards, Casey Quinlan, going on to J. Gary Shaw, who in a way was, you know, indirectly a mentor of mine who pointed me in the right direction back in the very early 90s. And he's now reading my book, which to me is, you know, awesome. You know, it's such an honor, you know, that he would, you know, buy and start reading my book. But as you all know, one of the main chapters in the book has to do with a researcher from Baxter Springs, Kansas, by the name of Beverly Brunson, who we have talked about so many times here, and we have followed her research. And because of Harold Weisberg's site, you know, where he had a lot of the documents stored, which had been laying dormant for so many years, you know, until, you know, I started to review those documents and to read her papers and read her correspondence with Harold Weisberg. And unfortunately, Harold Weisberg did not see the case the way that she saw it, okay? And in terms of the photographic evidence being completely tainted, you know, and I'm going to give you a very good example. Last week, we were talking about the Asham cable, remember, where they were talking about retouching, you know, the photograph to make it so it doesn't look like Ruby. Remember, guys? And that is, you know, that's so telling, because it tells you right there, you know, that everything, you know, they were working to create this monster, you know, of Lee Oswald being the man who shot Kennedy, you know, and to railroad him in a way where they would even falsify, obfuscate, you know, and alter the evidence. And, you know, Beverly said it from the beginning, and we're talking about 1967, 1968, you know.
Let me ask real quick. Larry was on to the touching up of the limousine. Larry was on to the touching up of the Oswald photographs. So just give us a quick recap of everything.
Absolutely. Beverly said it. Look, the Alton 6 has been altered. The Z film has been altered. You know, she talked about the blue painted onto the side of the limousine and why Shaney had been painted out of the Z film, you know. And we're talking about at a time where she hadn't even seen the Z film, you know.
What years were these, Larry?
I'm sorry?
Beverly was making these observations. How early on?
I'm talking about 67, 68, where she was.
That's pretty damn good.
She was working, and she was working based on the stills that had been published in Life magazine. You know, she wasn't even, you know, she hadn't even seen the film itself. You know, she was just saying, hey, you know, this just doesn't work out. You know, and so, you know, I'm proud to.
Life magazine and newspapers. That's
news and the Warren Commission, because the Warren Commission did publish a lot of the frames, but in very poor quality and black and white. You know, it was in Life magazine, you know, where they did start to publish them in color. Okay, and without any further ado, and I want to thank David, and I want to thank Brian and Casey, and especially J. Gary Shaw. You know, and you know, this is probably the first time that anybody has presented this, and this is Queen Hecate herself.
Yeah.
Beverly Brunson.
We'll take it.
It's a very World War II-ish photograph.
Well, it's a yearbook, and I want David to explain a little bit on this. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, from what I understand, Brian had contacted Gary and said he was talking about your book and about Beverly Brunson, and you know, he said I can't. Brian, he's a photograph guy. He gets on the internet, and that's one thing he does a lot of is he will go to several sites and pull down photographs from everywhere, and then he analyzes those and sees, you know, how some compare to the others. And he said, I cannot find a photograph of Beverly Brunson. And Gary said, I've got one. I'll send it right to you. So I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, the keeper of the the secrets or the files, you know, it's nice that, you know, we have researchers like first generation researcher J. Gary Shaw that can pull something out, you know, just by going, hey, I'm looking for something, and here it is. So
yeah,
that's got it.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about her research, you know, especially, you know, the Knoll Rider, which is my all-time favorite, which was hidden. It was covered up. You know, even in the report, the 888-page report, where they even dedicated a couple of paragraphs saying, oh, you know, there's some rumors of this motorcycle cop, you know, driving his motorcycle up the embankment, you know. And then we go and we look at and Beverly says, oh, wait a minute, you know, what about all these witnesses? And what about all these newspaper reports, you know? So what's going on here, you know? And then we keep researching, you know, and putting, you know, things together, and we go and look at S.M. Holland, what he has to say. And S.M. Holland, you know, when he was testifying before the Warren Commission, what was the name of the attorney, you know, who cut him short when he was about to talk about, you know, this. And then it was Mark Lane who went in and he expanded. He said, well, what exactly was it that you were about to say? He said, oh, well, you know, this guy, he drove, you know, the motorcycle up the embankment, you know. And then after that, you know, you've got Simmons, and you've got even Lee Bowers talking to Mark Lane about the Knoll Rider. And then, and we did a show, and we mentioned this recently, Bob Jackson, you know, in an interview with the Sixth Floor Museum. And he says, oh, yeah, you know, this motorcycle guy, you know, he rode up the embankment, he let go of the motorcycle kept going until it, you know, flipped over. You know, I mean.
Thank you, Sixth Floor Museum.
Yeah, exactly. You know, with Stephen Fagan, of all people, interviewing him, you know, I'm going like, wow, you know, so, you know, Beverly is the one who brought this, and nobody ever talked about it. Nobody ever wrote about it. Nobody ever brought it out, you know, this was hidden away. When Douglas Jackson, when I had, you know, contact with his son, you know, he was so freaked out that I was talking about this, you know, to me, it was pretty obvious that, you know, he knew about it, you know. And you know, I just want to, you know, shut up, you know, because I'm so excited about seeing a picture of her, you know.
No, I love it, Larry. It's great. It's terrific. It's coming across wonderfully.
I'm in love with her. Wait, I'm gonna tell you right now. I hope your wife's not in the room, but Larry is in love. I'm gonna tell you.
Yeah. You know, and then, you know, when and I wrote about this in the book, you know, and I termed this about, you know, the Joplin incident. You know, who of all the researchers that you know, and the first generation researchers, ever got, you know, lured into a meeting, drugged, kidnapped, you know, you know what I mean? You know, you know, in an obvious situation to shut her up, you know?
Did she ever, Larry, did she ever have any contact with Jim Garrison that you know of?
No, and that's a very interesting, very interesting question, Gary. Maybe David, you want to comment, because I know you've been researching Beverly now and stuff, in, you know, Baxter Springs and everything.
Yeah, I tell you what, in reading, of course, you know, the book, got it right here, my new Bible. I think I sleep with this damn book. But anyway, I have not come across, you know, her connected to Jim Garrison, which I find it kind of strange that, you know, at that time when Garrison is the, you know, the only person that brought a case against, you know, anybody in the Kennedy assassination, that he never talked to her. I find it odd, and I also want to find out more about her story. So, you know, thanks to Larry bringing her to light, I had never even heard of Beverly Brunson before. Yeah. And Baxter Springs and Joplin, Missouri, I mean, I was a truck driver for years, and I drove through those towns all the time. And now I told this to Larry. I said, you know, me and Brian and Casey are going to be working on a documentary about Beverly Brunson's life. And thanks to Larry bringing her to the light of day for us, you know, the three of us. I said, you know, she came along at a time when, you know, she was before her time in research.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, and I said, you know, we need to do a story on her, because more people need to, one, buy Larry's book, and number two, they need to find out her story, because she's one of the pioneers in this assassination information and research. So
and give her the recognition, and she deserves the recognition.
Absolutely.
Why don't you give us a recap of her life, Larry, to the extent you're able to recount it?
Well, you know, she was a poet, and she was a writer, okay? And at an early age, she went to New York City and lived the bohemian life, you know, probably in Greenwich Village, you know, and, all right, and...
Give us the years here. Let's see.
Well, she graduates, I believe, in, she's a class in University of Missouri. I think it's class of 51, I believe.
She went to the University of Missouri.
Yeah.
Missouri, of course, is not known to be a kind of a liberal hippie enclave.
Yeah. Well, you know, and her father, interestingly enough, was the mayor of Baxter Springs for 10 years. And then later on, he also served in the House of Representatives in Kansas, you know, so her family was very well known. When I reached the Baxter Springs Historical Society, and I spoke to this woman by the name of Erlene Spalding, and she told me, yeah, her family was very well known, and she sent me some articles about her father, Leroy, okay, and so, you know, little by little, you know, I was able to gather more information. I actually spoke to a third cousin of hers who, you know, at the time she had terminal cancer, you know, Glenna Shanks, and I've never been in touch with her after that. And she, you know, she didn't really remember that much about her, you know, just very, you know, broad and very, you know, vague information. So that's why there was such a void, you know. And I remember reading in the Weisberg letters where he actually asked her for a photograph. You know, I'd like to see a photograph, and she would also tell him, hey, if you ever come by Wichita, you know, the closest airport, you know, and we can meet, you know, for a couple of hours, because I've got so many things to talk to you about, you know. And that was the only relationship that she had, you know, with researchers, you know. And Weisberg, you know, put away all of her stuff, you know, and
so she sent all her stuff to Harold Weisberg. He didn't really look into it that much until you came along. You discovered it, and then basically have been confirming her research.
Yeah, basically.
Well, remember, Harold Weisberg took great offense at the very idea that the Zapruder film had been altered. In fact,
he's talking to the wrong girl. He's talking to the wrong girl. If you. You know?
Yeah, and not only that, he was so overwhelmed by researchers across the country.
Lawsuits and all that. He was always suing people.
Yeah, sending him stuff that he would just say, hey, I can't really do anything with this. I'll put it away. And which is exactly what he told her. I'm going to put this away, and maybe in the future, some kind of kook like me will process stuff, and develop it, and make, heads and tails about what the hell you're talking about here, and so, and that's the way it panned out, But I want to talk about other things that she brought about. Okay, for example, silenced weapons. Okay, because as she analyzed the Z film, not the Z film, but the frames, she noticed that the reactions of Kennedy and Connally did not add up, and vis-a-vis the supposed sounds that the witnesses were reporting, okay, because she was putting those two together, okay, and then so many other things. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Lee Oswald in the doorway, she was, hell bent. She was hell bent on that,
Yeah.
She knew it was Lee Oswald, in the doorway. She talked about, for example, streamers and other paraphernalia that might have been thrown to divert attention. Distractions, yeah, of course, which is a fundamental thing when you have this type of operation, and I know that Brian talked about this, with, firecrackers and smoke and stuff like that coming from other directions. And then, you've got what's really going on, from other positions. Like we have talked about the cubby hole, and one of my favorite positions, which I know that Jim is still, thinking about, the storm drain, but there's so many other things that Beverly talked about in these letters and in these papers that she wrote. For example, the third victim, okay, of the shooting, there was, and all she did was she read, the DPD radio logs. She read the testimony, and she said, wait a minute, it's pretty obvious that there was a third victim here, not just JFK and Connally, but somebody got shot up there, up the steps, and there was blood, and then there was an ambulance that was being chased around, that got lost, and then there was a nurse at the Parkland by the name of Bertha Lozano, who witnessed this guy come in a suit. His head was covered, with his suit jacket, and he was never registered. He was never checked in. They did blood work on him, and poof, he disappeared, So what happened to this guy? You know what I mean? And so many other things, the Mormon photograph, the reflections. Remember Shaney? We talked about Shaney being disappearing from the Zapruder film, and why that would have happened, because Shaney would have been in the line of fire from a shot from the sixth floor, southeast corner of the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository. The ballistics would not have worked out, period, and so many other things, and it's in the book. I'm going to plug it again. And thanks to David and Casey and Brian, who have been really promoting the book. And even though it's been a year now that it's been out, but,
Larry, you're naive. Books don't usually take off right at the start. It usually takes a while for them to grow.
Yeah. I agree.
You're picking up plenty of momentum. Don't you worry about that.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the key chapters.
Everyone thinks their book should be an instant bestseller the week it's out, and
not this information. You got to be kidding me.
Yeah, and and again, if she was so crazy, if she was so out there, why did the Joplin incident happen? And I mean, it's so obvious to me, and that her mail with Weisberg was being opened. And what's so incredible about this, Gary, David, and Jim, is that after the Joplin incident, all of her research stopped right there. Never, finito, it's done, Nothing after that was done, as far as JFK. And she lived a recluse life, with her partner, Mary Gibson, and that was it. She never did any research. And that is why the case of Beverly is so mysterious to me, so attracting, as far as JFK. I don't think of any researcher who has this mystique, okay, around her.
Tell us again, Larry, what brought her research to an abrupt halt?
Well, she gets approached, by some people to meet, to compare notes on research, and she lived in Baxter Springs. Joplin was, I think, about an 8 or 9 or 10 mile. David can correct me if I'm wrong. Drive away, and she meets up with this young couple. One was a very young, thin, slender girl with a very short haircut and stuff, and they lure her to this bar, and they wanted to talk about JFK stuff. They wanted to see some of her documents and whatever. And then after they go to this bar, and she never drank, she didn't drink. Okay, so after the next thing she knows, it's like 2 or 3 hours later, and she's been, and she's been in an accident, and an ambulance is there, and she's bleeding. She's got a big knot on her forehead, and the cops are there, and they tell her that she's been driving like a maniac, hitting cars, running red lights.
She must have been drugged, Larry. This sounds like she was given LSD or something.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what she talks about in the letter. She said, they must have slipped something in my drink.
Yeah, they were trying to kill her for her research. She was too good.
Absolutely, and that's exactly the way, and in the book, I don't really, what I do in the book, I just give you the documents. Hey, read the documents and make up your own mind. I give a little bit of opinions and stuff, but I think the documents speak for themselves, Jim.
This is
well, Larry, really, documents don't speak for themselves. You have to speak for them. You do.
Well, I do, but I'm talking about the letters between she and Weisberg. That's what I'm talking about.
Right after that, it's when the research stopped, when they drugged her.
Right. And from what I understand,
well, she got the message, for Christ's sake. They were going to kill her?
Yeah.
Hey, David, what'd you say about all this stuff, man?
What year was that, Larry? What year did the incident occur?
1968.
68?
Yeah, 68. And I think it's concomitant with the Garrison thing. I think, Jim, what they were trying to, maybe in a way, and this is like a hypothesis of mine, that they didn't want her to get, and that's why I agree with what Gary said, that to get together with Garrison and have her maybe join that team, and hey, work with Garrison to on this,
Well,
David, I know you're ready to explode there. Come on, talk to me.
Well, I tell you what, I'd like to interject here. I mean, the research that's in the book, in the JFK Horseman. I tell you what, if she would have continued, she was. I mean, like I said earlier, she was ahead of her time for her research. If the incident didn't happen and she would have continued, she was on point in her research. And from what I've read in the documents that Larry puts in the book. And then what I've been going through, looking on the Weisberg site, picking apart all the other documents that are on there, if she would have continued research, and I think she would have made a hell of a dent in this. And that's probably why the incident happened, was because they knew she was, she was like a dog with a bone. She wasn't going to let this go.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it just, and like Larry said, it's mysterious. She just stopped researching, and, there was no more correspondence between her and Weisberg. And I'm just like, we lost a faucet of, information that was pouring out of her that, would have helped us out in this case years and years and years ago.
Yeah, she was just as dangerous as Gary.
I want to also mention that when Vince Salandria read, because I sent him this as a paper before I published the book, and Vince, came back to me and said, what the hell, how come this didn't happen to me, and I said, well, you were good, but, she was a lot better, So, yeah. But yeah, so much information there. And I'm going to say this, that there's only, I think, 31 and 32 files there, but there is such a trove of information, in the Brunson papers, which I have to say, I have to, call those, the Brunson papers. And there's so much information there that, probably researchers are still going to, be interpreting them, for a long, long time.
Well, she was a true genius. I mean, it's amazing, Larry, that she would be so discerning and so early on. I mean, and they obviously told her she could continue her research and die, or discontinue it and live. I mean, that was the disjunction. Those were the options.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a point here where she has to make that decision. I think I'm in deep water here.
Not a public figure like Garrison, who they couldn't really do.
I'm taking on the deep state, and I'm not like Jim Garrison, who can.
When did she die, and of what cause?
Just natural causes in the year 2000.
At what age then?
I think 79, 73. I think 73 or something like that.
Had she married? Had children?
Never. She just she was with her partner, Mary Gibson. She never married, and she lived the recluse life, in a secluded part of town. I believe Erlene Spalding told me that they had this big wrought iron gate that looked like like a cemetery or something like that. That's something that you would see in a cemetery, and it was always closed, which adds to the mystique of Miss Brunson, and. But again, I think
Can you tell us about her parents? I'm interested in her genetics. What led her to be so perceptive and analytic?
They were famous.
I was saying that her father was the mayor of Baxter Springs. It was
academic or intellectual or educated.
Oh yeah. In her, she was a salutatorian there in the yearbook of her high school. Which is what was sent to me, by David, and again, the mystique, the mystery, of Beverly to me is really fascinating. It just fascinated me, and the stuff that she put out, the papers. If you read them, when you read them and you analyze them, and you see that she referenced everything, there's nothing that she would write that you could not go and corroborate, with documents. She would say, oh, but it says this and this and this in the Warren Commission, when she's talking about Kellerman, and I wrote about this, in the book, when he's talking about Kellerman talking about an upshot into the vehicle, and he said, wait a minute, this means that the headshot came from down below, and here's Kellerman talking about it, and she cites the whole thing, and like I said, I was talking about the Knoll writer. She went and she picked apart, that concept. She went and she talked about Simmons, Wilborn, Johnson, S.M. Holland, and on and on and on. And four of these witnesses were not even did not even testify before the Warren Commission. And then you go and you look at, and she talks about, but the papers were replete, with information about a Knoll writer, and then she talked about how this Knoll writer was being hidden away, by Dallas, and which is exactly what happened. Douglas Jackson, was being ensconced away completely. They did not want anybody to come and talk to Douglas Jackson, and now we know why, Then we look at the Newcomb tapes and what Douglas Jackson had to say there when he talks about 5 agents, dismounted the Queen Mary, surrounded the vehicle, the JFK limo with guns drawn. You don't see that in the Zapruder film. He talks about, Douglas Jackson talks about the Z film being all cut up. It's been edited, and it's all in the Newcomb tapes, So it confirms, Beverly's research. And, I'm just so happy to have seen this picture, I guess.
David, why don't you pick up and add further to what Larry's been saying?
Well, I tell you what, reading through the book and finding all the information and the nuggets of information that Larry's put in there, as a researcher myself, I'm sitting there going, okay, there's so much information that I didn't know about, and thanks to his book, I found it. And me and Brian, we just got back from Dallas. We went down there last Sunday evening. Well, we got down there Monday morning, and we went down to do field work, information. We met up with J. Gary Shaw, and also God, my brain locked.
Sorry, it'll come back.
Brian.
We went down there to do research and stuff, and I'm looking at now. I'm getting a chance to actually I took Larry's book with me, and I'm going through and I'm looking at stuff, and I'm seeing what he's got in there in photographs, and even 56 years later, I'm sitting there replaying what I read in the book. Now I'm standing down there and I'm looking at it. I'm like, okay, there is, and I went straight to the what we talked about in the last episode that I was on. I'm going back and I'm doing measurements with the laser finder to find out exactly what the yardage was. We looked at where the null rider was, and I'm sitting there and I'm being able to piece together the missing pieces, I feel, and it's because of Larry's book I got that.
David, why don't you tell Jim about the Bond slides and what you found and what you showed us, with the virtual reality.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We got a copy of the original Bond slides, and I took the Bond slides. I had them digitized, and then I took and put those on my cell phone, dropped it into a VR viewer. And what's nice about it is you can view it 2D. I mean, it's right up in your face, but you can also make it in 360. So when you put the goggles on and you're looking at a 2D photograph, you're able to look down, up, left, right, completely all the way around you, and you're seeing things that just pop.
Larry, why don't you take down the photograph and we can just temporarily, we can put it back up. I want to keep going.
Well, where this is leading, Jim, is because, and I know that you've had this in your presentations. Remember the Bell slide that shows those tire tracks going up the?
Sure.
Yeah, that's where he's going with this.
Yeah.
No, I know that. I'm just saying visually we can see each other better if you take down the Beverly photograph down.
Okay.
There we go. But yeah, being able to take the photographs and the slides from 1963 and seeing them in today's technology, we're seeing things that we've never seen before. It's one thing to look at it in a photograph, on a slide, on a projector, or on your computer screen, but being able to see it in virtual reality, right, literally just inches from your eyeball, you're able to pick out so many better things that you haven't been able to see before. And you see those tire tracks pop out in the Bond slides that you're sitting there going, okay, well, I've seen those, but your eyes never really pay attention to it until you see it in reality. And when I started having people at the conference that we were at in Olney, they got a chance to see it and to visualize it. They were just blown away. They're like, I've never seen I've seen these slides several times, but I've never seen them in this avenue of seeing them in this new format.
They're not in this e-film.
Yeah, and I took the Zapruder film, and I've been looking at that also. And I sent Larry a video just recently of the Much More film. And there's a gentleman that put a video up. It's been up for 4 years, and there was only 17 people that saw it before I did. And I'm sitting there going, okay, it's been up for years, and nobody's paid attention to this. But they take the film and they put a red filter and then a green filter, and you see the tail lights, plain as day, come up on the X100 limousine. And then when you see Clint Hill get off the limo and run to or the follow-up car and run to the limo, his leg literally disappears and then reappears. I don't know anywhere in human history that people's legs can dematerialize and rematerialize. This isn't Doctor Who. This is not science fiction. This is fascination. So the things that we got a chance to do this weekend and this past week in Dallas, I hadn't got a chance to tell Larry just yet, but we went to the Dallas Public Library.
By the way, David, why don't you prepare to do a whole show about that? I mean, that's really good.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. I'd be more than happy to. Well, I was going to tell you that I wanted to get this out there because we met with Christine Charbrough. She's the manager at that library on the 7th floor. And it's the one on Yonge Street at 1515 Yonge Street in Dallas, Texas. They have things that we have never seen, never knew they even had. During the Ruby trial, they didn't let photographers in the courtroom. They only had sketch artists. They have murals, basically. These things are like basically 4 foot by 5 foot drawings that we have never seen before. They had first generation photographs. They had the Times Herald on microfiche. I mean, they brought out, we were only there for probably 4.5, almost 5 hours, and we didn't see a tenth of what they have. So we're going to be going back down again real soon and just spend a couple days just at the library to see what they have. And everything that they have, you can take photographs of. Some things we can scan in, and we're going to be putting that on the website. It's just a plethora of information that, you know, I kind of feel it's almost like an untapped resource. You know, it's kind of like going to a miniature National Archives. So, but the nice part about it is they're easier people to deal with down there.
Yes.
Hey, you never know. You might even find some photographs there, you know, showing Lee, you know, outside the depository, you know.
Right.
Yeah, you know, you never know.
Well, the stuff that they have, I mean, I told her, I said, well, we're definitely going to be putting this information out. I said, because, you know, visitors that come down to do research, I said, they need to come here and see what you have. Hell, we even got a chance to see one of the block charters of the Declaration of Independence that's on display at that library. When we got there, they just brought it in by armored truck. And you would not figure going to the Dallas Public Library, you're going to see that piece of history in person. You know, we were all amazed about going down there and seeing everything. But yeah, it was a great field trip for us. So,
well, it sounds like Larry's book is proving to be a roadmap to what's important in Dealey Plaza and Dallas generally. In fact, I mean, you know, I love it.
It is, and I just remembered Betty Windsor. I apologize for not remembering her name earlier, but we went down and met up with Betty Windsor, and she went to the library with us, and she was kind of a guide into the Times Herald stuff because her husband worked at the Times Herald. Mm-hmm. And it was nice to take her with us and kind of get a little bit of a history lesson from her for what we were looking at the library. So yeah, I got to give kudos to Betty for joining us on that trip.
You know, now that you mentioned the Times Herald, I wanna, and I talk about this. I wrote about this in the book. The Times Herald and the Dallas Morning News were mortal enemies. Okay, so yeah. when I wrote about, you know, what was going on with the Altons, you know, and this whole scenario of getting, you know, the best photographs, you know, on the wire, you know, before anybody else, you know, that really happened, you know, and specifically when I questioned the timing of the Alton 6 photograph being transmitted at 1:03 p.m. that day, which is impossible. It's just a physical impossibility, Jim and Gary and David, you know. As a calibration and as a benchmark mechanism, I used a photograph taken at Love Field which shows Jackie and Connolly, and that's the famous photograph where Connolly is frowning, you know, and Jackie's got the roses in there, you know, and they're out right outside the plane and everything, you know, and how long it took for that photograph to be shown on television that day. It took about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, you know. So that's a great means of calibrating, you know, the how long it would take to get a photograph on, you know, developed, you know, cropped, you know, this and that, you know, the screening process, you know, the zinc plates and everything that I describe in the book, you know, which thanks to Roy Schaefer, you know, who was an expert and who was very knowledgeable, you know, in the process, and how long that photograph in particular took to be shown on national television. And we're talking about, it was taken around maybe 11 o'clock in the morning, and it doesn't show up on TV until maybe 2:30. So how in the hell does the Alton 6 photograph gets transmitted at 1:03 when Alton's was in Dealey Plaza for, you know, at least 20 minutes? Then he supposedly goes to a phone booth, you know, finds a phone, he calls, you know. It just didn't happen that way, you know, you guys.
Right. No, they were making up a story to account for missing time.
Yeah. And the timestamp that is shown in the transmission has been obviously falsified, you know. And
well, think of how many ways they try to argue that it wasn't possible that these films or photographs could have been altered because there's no time. Josiah Thompson immortalized these arguments. It was simply absurd.
Right, and then Cronkite does not show the alternate 6 and 7 until 6:34 p.m. Eastern that night. And it does not start to show up, on late editions of the East Coast papers, until that night, that evening. At the same time that it was being distributed. Now, and you have to understand that, at the time, a wire photo would be sent, and distributed in a certain manner. Okay, it was not sent individually to every newspaper. It was sent to a hub. From there, that you had multiple lines who went to other hubs, and that's how it got distributed. Okay, and the alternate 6 photograph, does not show up in Wichita, Kansas, at 2:30 in the afternoon. No way. Okay, there's just no way. To be able to be delivered in newspapers, at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock that afternoon. I'm sorry.
Well, they actually reprinted some newspapers. I mean, it was Ralph who discovered that. They put out new editions so they could put the alternates in it in a fake copy of the original edition.
Yeah.
That was a really stunning find of Ralph.
Yeah. They had, different versions, of the covers, and, so, this whole, we all put it in the context, that, the story as it develops, and as Cronkite and ABC and NBC, they disseminate the news as it's coming out of Dallas, for example, and we talked about this previously with David, and the rifles, the first report of the rifles was an Enfield, then a Mauser, and then it morph into a Mannlicher and a Carcano until, late that afternoon,
No, the next day. It was the next day.
Yeah, because even at midnight, they were still classifying it as a Mauser.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, the next day they finally come out and say, oh, guess what? It was a Carcano.
And of course, the Mauser would have been a very appropriate weapon for an assassin to use, and the Mannlicher Carcano, no one would have ever.
Yeah. But then David
known as the humanitarian rifle in World War II for never actually harming anyone on purpose.
Yeah, and then David wrote the whole thing about the frontal shot, with the Henry, the 5.5, that we did the other day in the course.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Armalite AR-5. That's right.
AR-5. Yeah, the Armalite AR-5. Yeah. So at the beginning, all this information is coming out. For example, Cronkite. Okay, the first thing that comes out of his mouth, he says, and the Secret Service men, being so efficient in their job, fanned out into the crowd looking for the assassin. Where did that come from?
Right.
Where did that
come into the crowd looking for the assassin?
Yeah, looking for the assassin. That's what really happened, because that's what Douglas Jackson wrote in his manuscript, and that's what Douglas Jackson said, in the tapes, And by the way, talking about Douglas Jackson, the manuscript, and I was, and I'm glad that we talked about this in Olney, that Douglas Jackson, he was the only motorcycle escort who was asked to write an account of what happened that day and night. Okay, and he turns it in, and it somehow it ends up with District Attorney Henry Wade, and Henry Wade has a clerk type it up. Okay, and Henry Wade, after he returns the manuscript, sends the manuscript to Harold Weisberg. Okay. And not too many people know about the relationship that Henry Wade and Harold Weisberg had. Everybody thinks that Henry Wade, was so gung-ho on Lee Oswald being guilty. But in the context of Dallas in 1963, you have to understand the pressure that he was under, and that later on, he developed, this relationship with Harold Weisberg, where he actually helped Harold Weisberg in his research, and he helped Harold Weisberg get documents out of Dallas. And not too many people know about this, So that's how Harold Weisberg gets his hands on Douglas Jackson's manuscript, and it's so telling, And by the way, David, it's in that pen drive that I sent you, but and you'll see it. in all of its splendor there. And when I was in touch with Douglas Jackson's son, he said to me, "Oh, you know, by the way, I have my dad's original manuscript in his own handwriting, and I'm thinking about giving it to the Sixth Floor Museum." I said, "Really? Are you kidding me? You know, nobody will ever see that, you know, if you do that." And he said, "Yeah, well, what should I do with it?" I said, "Well, you know, I don't care what you do with it because I already have a copy of it, thanks to, you know, Henry Wade, who, you know, did this and this and that with Harold Weisberg. I know what's in it." And there was a book by the name written by a guy by the name of Jim Bowles, who had been a sergeant, I believe, or a lieutenant in the DPD, and he wrote a book, a manuscript. It wasn't published, but it was circulated around, you know, about the Dallas Police Department and their views, you know, and about what really happened that day, and especially about the McLean thing, you know, the McLean tape, the dicta belt, you know. And he cited a lot of the information that was contained in that manuscript, and he never even mentioned Douglas Jackson. So he had a copy. He was given a copy of that, you know, Jim Bowles, Bowles. Okay, if you guys, so anyway, you know, I'm going off on a tangent here, but this Bowles, you know, he actually had his hands on Douglas Jackson's manuscript, you know, which was such a rare commodity, you know, at the time. And I was able to get it, you know, from the Weisberg site. And I don't know exactly, you know, if it was under Henry Wade or whatever, but I did get and that's when Douglas Jackson Jr. said to me, you know, "I have it, you know, what should I do with it?" And I said, "Well, you know, I don't care what you do with it. You know, I already have a copy of it, you know." So.
But, you know, Larry, the reality of what actually happened is so much more interesting, even fascinating than the fairy tales. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The deeper you dig, the more interesting it becomes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I say, the documents are out there, you know, and in the new documents, there's a lot of new stuff, you know, and which we have been able to dig up, you know, and interpret and stuff. You know, you just gotta, you know, and I'm so glad to, you know, meet up with David and Brian and Casey, you know, now, and that we're at another level, you know, of research, you know, and which is really, really good. What's great, Gary?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to play this for everyone.
Oh, by the way, Gary, I have to say the JFK Horsemen 1 and 2 are still #1.
They are. We're gonna get those up real quick. All right, so here we're talking about the Malakir Carcano.
Yeah, go for it. Hit play.
Yeah. Oh, I messed up. Hang on. I'll find it.
We'll cut it out.
Yeah.
Deputy Sheriff Boone from Watchman said it is a Mauser and pointed to the 7.65 Mauser stamp on the barrel.
There's an intonation to that statement that it should mean something.
Well, the shells we found came from a 6.5 Italian rifle.
You mean those three cartridges don't relate? Three cartridges that were found on the southeast river.
It came from a 6.5 Italian carbine.
The Dallas PD were clowns.
Yeah.
I mean, they had the task of framing Oswald, and they did a piss-poor job of it.
That was found on the German Mauser with the sniper scope that was used to kill President 7.65 Mauser, German rifle, similar to those who served the world with the 7.65 Mauser, German army rifle, telescopic sight, and one shell left in the chamber. Two spent shells have been found nearby, and apparently they're hooking this as the murder. What a sniper scope. High-powered Sheriff's Department said the rifle had been found in a staircase on the 5th floor of a building near the scene of the assassination. It was a 7.65 Mauser, a German Mauser, I believe. In other words, a Mauser has been found. It's Mauser. Also worked in the building where the murder weapon, the German-made Mauser rifle, was found in the Mauser with which the assassin was apparently
It's a great compilation.
Well, it just goes to show you, even back then, we had the fake news of
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's very good, Dave.
Used in the assassination of President Kennedy. It was not a Mauser, as has been reported through most of yesterday and today, but an Italian monolithic Carcanto, manufactured in the Italian town of Carcanto.
Yeah. 2 solid days. And you
Yeah.
saw every one of those clowns, every one of them was, it's right there. I mean, if that doesn't do it for you, I don't know what does. You know?
Well, I went back and watched. I've got the it's either 6 or 9 hours from the NBC shows, and NBC was reporting it. They went from a 30-06 to a British Enfield 30-30, and I'm just sitting there going, okay, you have 3 rifles. You know, you've got the Mauser, you've got the 30-30, and then you end up with the 303 British Enfield. Not a damn one of those is, you know, linked to Oswald. And it really, I'm sitting back and I'm looking at this. I'm like, I know you guys are getting this stuff off the AP wire, but, you know, who the hell is writing the narrative here? Because it sure isn't, you know, what's going on the ground in Dealey Plaza.
But the Enfield does get linked to our good friend, Buell Wesley Frazier.
Wesley Frazier, that's right.
Exactly right. Now, look, we're talking Dallas, Texas here. They can figure out what gun is what. Then take 2 days and someone say, you know what, man, we've been blowing it for 2 solid days. It was really a Mannlicher Carcano.
Well, I mean, even Henry Wade at midnight was calling it a Mannlicher, or he was calling it a Mauser weapon, you know. And I'm sitting there going, okay, Wade's getting his information from Dallas PD. You've got all the stuff that's in the book on Trail of the Assassins. I think it's page 113, and they're coming back going, you know, it's a 7.65 Mauser. It just, you know, you look at the narrative they were trying to set up, you know, they look this way here. If they couldn't get one, they had a backup plan. Already ready to go.
You've always got a backup plan.
You know, plan A don't work, go to plan B. So.
Love it.
And talking about Wade, I think that he was thrown into a very difficult situation, you know, where he had to keep all the parties, you know, satisfied, yet he didn't know what was going on. He knew that there was a lot of information coming in about multiple shooters. He knew, you know, what Hoover was doing to the Dallas Police Department, you know, putting all this pressure on them, you know, hey, you know, you guys, you know, need to, you know, give it up, you know, we're going to take over, you know, and he's, you know, and then he's got this situation where there's also, I don't know, any of you guys have ever heard this, that Wade even talked about that he had been, I think in the river basin there in Dallas, you know, and he had been there and he target practicing or something like that. And he saw these guys target practicing, you know, and he even talks about this in one of the letters, you know, to Weisberg, you know, which I thought was very, you know, very strange, you know. But Wade was a very, very key figure in this whole thing because he was trying to keep a lot of people happy, a lot of people satisfied, you know. Yet he was being pulled in so many different directions, you know, and so I would not want to have been in his shoes.
Larry, this has been one of the most lively conversations we've ever had on the show. You and David have done a terrific job. Gary, am I right that the time has come?
Yeah, I think we should call it there. It's been a good show. So, all right, so David, get a little PowerPoint together. We're going to have another show with some information you have.
Well, it's not just a PowerPoint because we want to see, you know, we'll watch the film and talk about all the points David was making. Larry, this was just riveting, really good, really fascinating.
Well, I think it starts with
Beverly.
Yeah, Beverly, yes.
I loved it.
You know, I was, you know, very, like I said, you know, this is the first time I see a picture of her, you know. I've been researching her for, 6 years now, you know, and it's part of the book, and she needs to, you know, when you talk about Sylvia Marr, you know, and I'm not going to say Mary Farrell, you know, but Sylvia Marr, you know, and you talk about Shirley Martin, Lily Castellanos, you know, all these early first-generation researchers, I believe that she needs to be up there with them, you know.
Oh, clearly. She was in a class of her own. My goodness. She was some kind of genius. She had a genius for this, Larry. We're going to have to talk about this more. Larry, you want to take us out?
No, I want to thank.
I meant Gary.
Gary. Okay, all right.
Don't forget, it was Beverly Brunson saying the Z film was altered and it was leading the door away.
That's right.
7. So Black Ops.
Wait. The Null Rider, Gary. The Null Rider. The
Null Rider and
brilliant.
Up the limousine. So many things. Black Ops. Come on over to the true side. We'll see you next week with JFK 238. We'll see you next time.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
That's what we were told. Most Americans never believed Lee Oswald was the lone gunman, for excellent reasons. In fact, there were at least 6 shooters who fired from 8 to 10 shots or more who are identified here. We have, finally, the solution to the greatest murder mystery in history, laid out for the world to see, proof after proof after proof. Photos were faked, the body was changed, x-rays were altered, the home movies were fixed. 15 experts contribute to a 529-page book with 1,037 photos and diagrams in black and white and color.
Hi, this is Gary King. If you'd like JFK, who, how, and why, and would like to support the new JFK show, then go to PatriotRadioBooks.com. That's PatriotRadioBooks.com.